Nervous watching me. She's my backup. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WillMed Charitable Foundation Caregiver Teleconnection session. I just want to thank you so much for joining us and hope that you will join us during the conversation piece of our time here too. Today, we have the Pride of Innovative Programming with Dr. Elliot Montgomery Sklar and Lucy Bearluck, our dear Lucy. And I want to tell you both about them and about our very special guest speaker. So Lucy has a master's degree in social work from McGill University. She's presently working as a consultant for a health network in Montreal, Canada. She has been involved in various research projects and has published numerous articles related to caregiving issues. She's lectured at several universities and colleges, and she's done that on innovative approaches to caregiving and presents annually at international and national conferences. And really, she's one of the founding innovators of the Teleconnection series. Lucy is also a consultant for private industry in the United States, including her work with the WellMed Charitable Foundation and their clinics in Texas. And in addition, Lucy would like you to know on a personal basis, she was a caregiver for her mom for about 10 years. Now, Dr. Elliot Montgomery Sklar is an associate professor of healthcare sciences at Nova Southeastern University in Florida and brings more than a decade of experience in public health to our program. He's worked in many capacities to support the needs of communities and caregivers, both as an educator and as a manager of community-based health programs, both in Canada and the US. Dr. Sklar is an expert in issues addressing aging in the LGBT plus community and has published and presented his work internationally. And he has sent me some information on Kate Spellman, who has a master's in divinity. She joined Age Options, which is the area agency on aging of suburban Cook County in Chicago, in 2019, and is the program specialist for Thrive with Pride. She also coordinates advocacy for LGBT plus concerns and assists with training around LGBT plus cultural competence. Kate is an ordained Episcopal priest and comes with a background in program development and volunteer management. She and her wife are living their best sandwich generation lives, caring together for their 6-month-old now and aging parents. And according to Elliot, as far as we know, she is the only LGBTQA specialist who is assigned, who has a position at an area agency on aging in the country. So with that, we've got a very special group here. And Elliot, are you or Lucy going to start off today?
I'm going to start off, and I want to thank you so much for the great introduction. And thank you again, Kate, so much for joining us. We are thrilled to have you and looking forward really to this month's Pride series. We're doing things a little differently this time, and we have a number of guest speakers who will be joining us each week from across the country, representing the work that they do with different communities across the country, but also with seniors and caregivers. And it's interesting, yesterday, Lucy and I had a program on our teleconnection about culture and about faith. And we were so glad, Kate, that you're joining us today, given your background as well. After we were done, I was speaking with a former colleague of mine who was very well-intentioned and was asking me to educate her and asked me a question that really caught me off guard. And she asked me, why is Pride Month celebrated? And I had an answer for her in terms of the history and what happened and what led to the events of Stonewall and all of this. But it took me a moment to really think about her question and to answer it in a way that was going to be meaningful to the context of her asking the question. And what I realized is that we still have seniors in parts of the country who don't feel safe coming out. There are still children in parts of the country who feel that it might be better to commit suicide than to be gay. And so I think Pride is for them, to show them that there is a better way than what people are necessarily feeling or experiencing. And I think for that reason, for me, Pride is so important to celebrate because we need to show others that it's okay to be different and we can embrace it. And I thought to begin today by asking everyone who's participating, because today is really all about discussion, why is the celebration of Pride meaningful or important to you? Or why do you think we have a need to celebrate it?
Okay, folks, if you're calling in, just press *6 and I can recognize you by your area code and phone number. And if you're on Zoom, please just unmute yourself and talk to us. We would love to hear from you. It so enriches our podcasts.
It was an interesting question that struck me, and I know that it's a loaded question, but I was just curious from other people's perspectives how you would answer that or what your thoughts are. She had a valid point, and she was saying we don't have straight Pride Month, and that was why I gave her the answer that I did, because I wanted it to have an impact or meaning for her. And it was well intentioned. She grew up in a very conservative environment and is from the South. And I'm not unaccustomed to working with people like that. So I was just curious what other people would say, how you would answer that.
This is your opportunity. Let us know who you are, what you need, and how you're doing. And I don't have anybody yet, but I'd like to say, Elliot, if you don't mind, I have been an aging and disability social worker for 50 years. And once I got started on your programs, I learned so much. And I pass it on.
Thank you. Adele, I think you had a comment, and I see Lucy, you're speaking, but you're muted. Adele, if you want to unmute.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just going to say that it's the same as enjoying and participating in and celebrating Black History Month and Hispanic Month. It's an acknowledgement of our differences. It's an acknowledgement of our differences, but also how much we are all basically the same. And I was asked actually that ages ago, why do you guys celebrate Black History Month? We don't celebrate, she said Caucasian History Month. It was funny. And it struck me like, you know what, you're right. Maybe they should have a month that celebrates Caucasian history. I don't know, but how many different, you're going to have German history, you're going to have the Vikings, Denmark, Russian. But that's why I enjoy and I celebrate Pride History Month. I participate in many of the events. I think it's fun. I think it's, I enjoy the differences that we all come together that can create just one great population that we are. And when you enjoy the differences of people, you're more accepting and you learn so much. I learned so much when I, attend any of the celebrations. And that's it for me. That's why I do it. I think it's just celebrating the differences that we all are and that what we have to offer.
Thank you so much for your comment, Adele. We also have a bunch of comments in the chat, which are awesome. GJ said, for me, Pride is an acknowledgement of how far we've come and a chance to wrestle with the past, present, and future of identity. Bill said that Pride in 2022, the visible fight against structural and institutional biases for older LGBTQ+ persons being visible in a mentor role or role models for the younger community. It's very true, and that's something we're going to talk about actually in a couple of weeks about intergenerational community and community programming and how important that is, especially as people are aging. And GJ, I also really appreciate your comment. Every month is already Straight White History Month. We have to remind people that alternatives have always been there, and have always been here rather, and are just as valid. So I really appreciate those comments. And Lucy, I saw that you were going to say something too.
Well, thank you, Kate, for participating today. It's a great question, and it's something to kind of step back and think about it. And for me, my field is in gerontology, And I think a lot of seniors in that community have dealt with so many issues. And what I would like to see is the recognition by the community of what these seniors have gone through and where they're at. And so I'm hoping that, when this is celebrated, that there's a celebration for them, because they were really the ones who kind of battled, and that everyone is where they are today. A lot of it is due to these seniors, and many of them, as you said, Elliot, from our sessions. It's so heartbreaking when I hear someone talking about it. I'm afraid to go to long-term care. Are they going to accept me? Are they going to judge me? I'm scared. And when their family that loves them tells me the same thing, I'm concerned about placing my aunt or my mother, whatever it might be. And so I think that's an important piece for me, to make sure that seniors in this community are recognized and valued and are accepted, because they still have this feeling of fear, as Elliot said.
And all of those points are so valid and also very unfortunate. And Kate, I want to ask you, how would you answer the question? And then we can take it from there and enjoy all of the wealth of the information that you have to share with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Elliot, and thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Evelyn. I'm just delighted to be here and to be a part of the Pride of Caring series. This is a really interesting question, and I was actually thinking about it recently because not as many people know this, but there is actually an LGBT History Month. It's October, and National Coming Out Day is always on or around, I think, the 10th or the 11th of the month. I think it's always supposed to be the 11th, but sometimes it has to move for other holidays. I think for me, Pride Month is really more about joy than anything else, and about celebrating and being joyful in the gift of our various gender identities and sexual orientations. It's, began really with, and is as a commemoration of the Stonewall riots and the historic struggles. But the element of joy, I think, is just really important, and being joyful and being celebratory. I do want to say, Elliot, I love your comment that Pride is for the folks who maybe can't be out or who are afraid to be out. I recently met one of my neighbors who said, she was walking her dogs. I was walking with my son to daycare, and just meeting her. And she said, I live in the house with the flag. And I knew exactly what she meant. There's one house in our neighborhood that's flying the progressive or the Philadelphia Pride flag. And I said, oh, my wife and I were very excited to see that flag. And it was just a nice moment of connection. But then what she said to me was, she said, yeah, I put it up last year for June, and then I kept it up all year because I realized she lives directly across from our K-8 school. And she said, some kid in the school really needs to see that. So she keeps her flag up. She did change it out for Memorial Day. She put up an American flag, but she puts her Pride flag up throughout the school year, so that some kid who's struggling, or some teacher, some staff member, it's not age specific, someone who's struggling will see it and kind of know, okay, there's a world outside of this school building. There's a life outside of the one I'm living now. There's that famous It Gets Better project, which I think is just a great message that a lot of people need to hear. So I think the celebration of joy, as much as I value and I will talk about and love LGBT history, I think it deserves its own month, truly. But that celebration of taking joy and pride in who you are, I think is really important.
I think that's perfect. So let us begin by asking you to tell us a bit about the work that you're doing with your AAA and Thrive with Pride.
Thank you. I love talking about what I do. I was saying this before some folks got on the call, but we think that I am the only full-time employee of an area agency on aging who is dedicated to LGBT issues. And I like to say that out loud and publicly because I'd love to be wrong, because it would be really fun to have colleagues. So if you get in touch with your AAA and they have a staff member like me, tell them that I'm out here and would love to connect. That is, I want to say, not to say that other AAAs are not doing LGBT work within the LGBT space, working to reach out to or help LGBT elders, just that I'm the only full-time dedicated employee. And really the way that this came about was through the signature program that I run. Program started in 2019. The intent was to build safe gathering spaces for LGBT older adults. Our AAA services kind of the inner ring of suburbs. So it's suburban Cook County, which is right outside of the city of Chicago, but not the kind of outer ring suburbs. And we know that folks live out here. We know that there are great resources in the city of Chicago. There's some terrific spaces dedicated even to specifically to LGBT older adults, but not as much in the suburbs. The idea was to create these safe spaces. Folks would just come and gather and have conversation and be able to connect, much like we're doing here. And then folks from Age Options would be able to connect with those spaces to, as questions came up, provide resources, provide some of our programming. 2019, right? So that was right before the pandemic. We had sort of like just kicked things off. And then we went into this shelter in place, which we thought was going to last for, remember this, it was going to be 2 weeks, and then we were going to be right back there. That clearly did not happen. So what we do now is Age Options hosts a Zoom call very much like this, once a month. We have a guest speaker, we have a topic. We record that session. It's open to everybody, free, no registration required. And I'm going to talk about my website where you can go and see a list of both upcoming programs and also view recordings of past presentations. We just open it up to everybody. It's always a really interesting, diverse mix of people because it's depending on the topic, right? We'll have more professionals 1 month and then more older adults 1 month. We had folks from a slew of different social service agencies the month that we had somebody talk about advocacy. It just really depends. So it's kind of a fun and diverse space. We always get a chance to kind of introduce ourselves and talk to each other. Then we work with a number of local partners. So the partners were in the pre-COVID world going to be the locations for these safe gathering spaces. Age Options tries not to do a lot of direct programming because we think that community-based institutions are often better at doing that or know more people. So now we do have 6 funded partners, and the funded partners host their own kind of gatherings. 99% of those are online still. Well, that's not how math works. So 5 out of 6 of those partners are still meeting online. The 6th does a hybrid option. So some people are on Zoom and some people are in the room. And they kind of host like a follow-up discussion. So the idea is that we have this big public-facing program. We get a lot of information out there. People have a chance to connect with an expert in their field. And then we also have the option of joining a smaller space. Usually they have to register or talk to somebody to get the Zoom link. So they're protected spaces where people can really fully be themselves, discuss what they want to discuss. I don't attend those or police them. So some of them are just like purely social gatherings where people are connecting with one another and sharing their own resources. And some of them really do like to stay on topic. It's interesting, and we can talk more about this, but we found that there are actually certain advantages to doing programming online. It's more accessible for people, both in terms of physicality, like if you have mobility or transportation issues, it's much easier to get on Zoom. And if you're caregiving for somebody, right, if you don't have respite care, it's much easier to get on the phone or get on the computer than find something that the person you're caregiving for can do for the hour or however long you're going to be on and be a part of this. But again, we've also started to build this resource of recorded programs. So our website is thrivingwithpride.org. Once I stop running my mouth, I'll put that in the chat. But you can go on and you can see this whole kind of archive of presentations. I like to think that what we're doing is widening the scope of inclusive aging services in suburban Cook County. And we're making sure people know what's already going on because there are a lot of folks actually doing LGBT aging work in and around Chicago, a lot of resources that already exist, but it's always hard to find out about them. So that in a nutshell is Thrive with Pride. It's a really interesting program. It's still developing. One of the things I love about it is what we're always trying to learn from the folks that we're working with. Part of the reason the program started is that we knew people were out there, but we didn't know what the actual specific needs are. So we're learning more about the population and what they need, kind of building the plane as we fly it.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Lucy, I'm not sure if you had anything you wanted to ask.
No, yes, I do. I was wondering, what are some of the issues you see among the LGBTQ plus regarding seniors and caregivers in your area?
Um, a lot of it is fairly typical stuff, right? I want to say, and not just because we were talking about this earlier, Lucy, in regards to Montreal, but Chicago is really rapidly becoming a less and less affordable city. And that's happening in the suburbs as well. We get a number of calls about housing, people who are not able to afford their current housing or not sure how they're going to continue to afford their housing in the future. We also do talk a lot about going into long-term care and what that will look like for people. When I first started, I was really naive and people would say, oh, we're worried about long-term care. And I'd say, well, Illinois I think it was 2018 or something like that. We had just passed a bill in Illinois requiring the staff at long-term care facilities to have some kind of LGBT cultural competency training. And I was like, this is great. Well, two things, right? The staff at those facilities turns over really, really, really rapidly. And the other thing is that people are actually afraid of being bullied by other residents, right? Somebody said to me, I don't want to move into one of these facilities and find that the kid who used to beat on me in the playground in third grade lives down the hall from me. And I still can't be myself, or I still have to live with that kind of torture. That really struck me. And one of my pie in the sky dream projects is to work with some of our local long-term care ombudsmen to try to work on improving nursing home culture, not just for LGBT older adults, but anybody who's being bullied or being harassed in those facilities for a different or even a perceived difference. The other thing that I would say is that we have talked a lot about mental health recently. I think especially kind of at the height of the pandemic when people were so incredibly isolated, both physically and socially, and then coming out of it, right? We all know there's significant overlap. It's not just a circle, right? But the Venn diagram of LGBT elders and people who are living with HIV, there's significant overlap. And even where there's not overlap, LGBT elders, a lot of them lived through the height of the AIDS pandemic and remember really, really acutely what those days were like. COVID brought a lot of that back, and just living with the kind of level of anxiety that promotes, I think has been hard for some people to manage. We definitely see some people who are kind of, it's always a balance, right? The cost of isolating isolating will keep you safer from the virus, but also comes kind of with a toll on your mental and sometimes even your physical health. We know social isolation can be really physically dangerous for people. So that's something we've had a couple of Thrive with Pride programs where we've had people come on and talk about mental health. Someone from NAMI, which is the National Association, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. Someone correct me, Elliot.
You're correct, exactly.
And then also a local therapist who provides trauma-informed services just to come on and really just open a conversation. Those are some of the most interesting and in-depth conversation we've had as a program.
That's awesome. One of the things in our Pride of Caring series that we've talked about was actually, I believe back in January, it was a little bit after World AIDS Day, and how there was really a lack of sensitivity because many people have been referring to our COVID pandemic as our first epidemic that we've lived through, our first pandemic, when in fact many community members don't feel that way at all and feel that living through the AIDS epidemic in the 80s was their first epidemic. So we talked a lot about sensitivity with regards to that issue. So you touch upon that. We have some questions for you from the chat. How does Thrive with Pride and its partners make sure it's reaching LGBTQ folks who don't have a lot of social or financial resources?
That is a great question. It's kind of a chicken and the egg scenario, right? Where we're trying to reach out to people who are socially isolated, but the kind of traditional channels that we do outreach in are not ones that people are going to be accessing if they are socially isolated. We are now working in the next month or so to launch. We're basically trying to get more peer outreach started. I think that in the LGBT community, especially, but really in any community, like word of mouth is often one of the greatest ways that people find out about something. A personal invitation that comes from someone you know and trust or met at an event means a lot more than getting an email from some completely random person at an institution. Like no one's ever heard of age options in our area because we don't because we step back from the direct programming and let more local places do it. The other question was about how do we reach folks who maybe don't have material or financial resources.
Social
That
or
is also,
financial.
yeah, that's also something we're kind of working intentionally on. Chicago is really heavily residentially segregated. I think historically more than a lot of other cities in the United States. So we have worked to create some geographic diversity. We try to work with some institutions that are already serving folks who are lower income or of lower socioeconomic status. And we're also trying to work with folks who can provide some technology, right? Because the big thing about an online program is that it's not accessible to folks who don't have the technology to access it. We work with Howard Brown, which is a local federally qualified health center. They have a terrific program called Senior Tech Connect. If you're in or around Chicago, I urge you to look it up for yourself or for a friend. Honestly, if you're in the Zoom call, maybe it's for a friend, where they will work with people. They get them the technology, they work on the internet connection, and then actually like sit down with people and walk them through some of the stuff. And we also have a program that's called Uniper, which is a device that turns any TV into a virtual senior center. It's basically an adaptation for a TV that turns it into a Zoom capable device so you can join online programming. So we do have some efforts like that. But I will admit, like outreach is kind of our constant, one of our constant issues that we wrestle with for the reasons that I talked about. It is hard to reach people who are not otherwise being reached because they're not otherwise being reached for a reason, right? And we just have to step up and continue and try to talk to people, get those peer recommendation going, kind of constantly think and brainstorm, right? We do online advertising, but we also need to do paper advertising, and we need to get that into spaces that people are actually visiting. So that's kind of my nutshell, but honestly, it's a question that we continue to wrestle with. And I think we should for a long time. We're always going to have to be asking who's not in this program or who's not getting this information, who really needs it.
I think it's a challenge that most organizations face. And the other thing too is that we live in a country where even if people do have financial resources, it doesn't mean that they have the resources that they need for social or mental health support. We rank #1 as a country in spending on healthcare, but I believe 25th for spending on social services and mental health support. So it's an important point, I think, for all of us to consider in the programming that we deliver and in terms of our reach, because even if we're reaching people who might be financially well off, they might not have the resources that we're actually providing. And we've received a ton more questions. So is it okay if I continue to ask what's being asked in the chat box? Okay.
Absolutely.
Bill is asking, I'm concerned that there are no known or out LGBTQ+ ombudsmen. It's a great point. Are there any efforts in your geographic area to rectify this?
So for those who don't know, and I will count myself, I really kind of only recently learned this. If you are living in a facility that's receiving any kind of Medicare or Medicaid income, you will have an ombudsman in your area who's the person you can reach out to. I'm in the very beginning stages of working on this, but I have made some wonderful connections with folks up in Evanston, which is one of the northern suburbs of Chicago. I'm pointing north in my own house, as if that matters to you guys, but in the north of the city, Evanston has its own kind of very highly specialized ombudsman. She's, I don't think, a member of the LGBT community, but a really terrific ally. I don't know of any efforts specifically to diversify the pool of ombudsmen themselves and ombudswomen. It's unfortunately kind of an ombudspeople. It's a very gendered term. But I do know that there's some significant effort in Illinois and some people thinking about how do we improve those congregate living situations. What I will say is that a lot of the time when I talk to people who know nursing homes better than I do, and I say like, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to make these more welcoming places? The very first thing that they bring up is staffing. These places just struggle to hire and then to retain and just enough staff to kind of like meet baseline. And because those are lower paying jobs, they tend to be people who are immigrants, who are lower income, and don't always come from the same, they may not come from the same kind of an open culture that folks in the United States kind of expect. My friend, the ombudsman in Evanston, always talks about, well, the culture that we need people to conform to is the nursing home culture. So how are we going to create and develop these nursing home cultures that are really open? So it's not the exception that someone feels comfortable being who they are, but the rule, right? Everyone here is working on being a good neighbor, and everyone here is working on accepting and loving and being with one another exactly how they are. I will say, again, like I've learned a lot about this in the past month, these congregate living situations. Ombudsmen cover not only, and area agencies on aging also cover not only people who are 60 plus, but also people who are living with disabilities. Ombudsmen also work with specialized mental health facilities in Illinois. It may not be the same in every state. So there's a real diversity of folks who are living in these situations who have very, very different needs. Sorry, Bill, I've gotten like way away from your original question. I am not aware of any efforts to consciously staff the ombudsman pool, but I know that there are folks who are, myself included, who are really interested in working with that ombudsman role as a tool to improve people's experiences in long-term care.
Excellent answer. We have more questions, and I will add that I am also not aware of any efforts that are being made to diversify the pool of ombudsmen. They are supposed to be allies of all communities, but I know certainly organizations nationally like SAGE and other LGBTQ plus advocacy groups, that would probably be a good area for them to look at, certainly. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to circle back to a previous question that we received in the chat that lends well to a topic we wanted to discuss today. So the first one is, how do your organizations reckon with the ongoing waves of COVID-19? Have you made any of your pivots permanent?
That is a really great question. And again, one that we're just continuing to wrestle with. We recently hit the 2-year anniversary of this quote unquote Band-Aid solution that we were working for. What happened with my program specifically was in March of 2020, we went into shelter in place. And I'd love to talk about this more, but many of the organizations that I work with are smaller. A number of them are faith-based, and everyone was just scrambling and completely burnt out. By June though, we were like, we really have to do something, and it's Pride Month. So we launched the current iteration of the program where we do have that large Zoom call with the expert that's once a month, blah, blah, blah. What has happened again is we're just learning a lot as we're doing it. And so I think the short answer is yes, some of these adaptations are going to have to be permanent. The Zoom calls are far more accessible for people, whether you have a physical limitation or a transportation limitation or a caregiving limitation, or just a limitation on your time too. Someone pointed out to me recently that if we're asking people to drive a half an hour or an hour to get to a program, and then the program lasts an hour and then they're driving all the way back, it's a huge ask. Rather than, if you're driving 20 minutes for an hour-long program and back. So the geographic spread and the traffic situation in Chicago and the public transit situation don't always lend themselves to programs being in person. We've also, as you guys know, because you're recording this call right now, the ability to record and then disseminate information later is really great. We typically see as many people view our YouTube videos as we're present at the program. The program's pretty small, so don't go on my YouTube page and be like, oh. And that's over a period of time, right? Because the recording allows people to access the information anonymously, which if you are not ready to be out or be outed is huge. People can access it at any time, day or night. So if you are working, a program that happens in the middle of the day does not work for you, but you can come home and watch a 20-minute YouTube video while you prep dinner. And the other thing that was also pointed out to me recently is that a recorded program, if you have a learning disability, a hearing issue, or any other kind of like sensory issue, can actually be more accessible because you can stop it, walk away, gather yourself, or rewind if you didn't hear or you didn't quite grasp a point. So there's a lot of accessibility issues. The other thing I want to go back to is, again, Chicago is incredibly residentially segregated. So something that we have done during the pandemic is host these, we were calling them Sage Table, but it's basically an intergenerational dinner gathering. We did these twice. We made some very creative funding choices, and we're able to send a meal to everybody who participated. So everybody got on Zoom. It was like 20 to 30 people each time. Older adults, younger adults, folks like me who are older in some contexts and younger in some contexts, got together on Zoom and shared a meal and conversation. And what I noticed is that room was incredibly diverse, especially for Chicago. Chicago's residential segregation is not only by class, it's really by race. And so having like folks from Evanston to the south suburbs, to the west suburbs, to in the city, all together in one virtual space led to a much more diverse group of people gathering than I think we would ever actually successfully get together in person. That being said, we all love in-person gatherings. It's so fun to be together in ways that are safe and affirming. And so I think as we move forward, we will see more of our site partners choosing to do a hybrid option. Like I talked about, we have one site that has some people on Zoom and some people at home. But I'm also encouraging our site partners to talk about hybrid as, I made this up, but asynchronous hybrid programming, right? So that it's not that every single gathering has some people in person and some people on Zoom, but maybe month to month. If it's June, the weather is nice and you can be outside in Chicago, why not make that an in-person program that's outdoors and has some COVID precautions so people feel safe attending? You get to see each other, you get to start some new relationships. And then as we get into the darker winter months, the colder winter months in Chicago, those gatherings can move back online. I think what we found is that it's really hard to start relationships online, but it's easier to maintain them. So it'll have to be a kind of a balance between those elements, the online and the offline elements. Another thing to say, sorry, to just continue to run my mouth, is that the online programming has allowed us to draw on a real diversity of speakers as well. We were kind of talking before the call really started about where everyone is geographically, and we're all over. And it's such an easy ask for Elliot to say to me or me to say to Elliot, hey, can you get on Zoom for half an hour and just talk about this thing? Versus saying, hey, could you fly to Chicago, disrupt your life for several days and be in this meeting with me? So it's given us a much wider access to experts and folks from all different walks of life, both around Chicago and around the country, who are able to interact with our folks.
You touched upon so many excellent points. And I think even beyond COVID, the other things that you brought up too, with regards to inflation and cost of living increasing, the cost of fuel going up, all of these things are to be considered. And if you have the opportunity to use Zoom, you don't need to pay for respite. You don't need to pay for transportation. You don't need to get dressed and go somewhere. I think there are a lot of pros for sure. One question that we received in the chat box is an important one. It's something that Kate, you and I had talked a little bit about in our exchanges. And the question is from GJ. Do you find the target community, so the LGBTQ plus community, is uncomfortable talking about aging and or late life illnesses?
I will say, I think the folks who are opting into our program are kind of self-selected to be fairly comfortable talking about aging, because we are saying like, hey, this is an aging services program. Come talk about all the aging services that are available. So probably the slice of folks that I'm seeing are not afraid to talk about this stuff. There's some folks who are really proud to talk about their age because of what they have endured or what they have survived. There's one guy who's local to Chicago, but like on I'm surprised he's not on this call. He seems to do like every single LGBT aging thing out there, who now introduces himself with his name, his pronouns, and then his age, because he is proud to be the age that he is. And it's interesting to see as you go around a call, how that influences. So other people sometimes start introducing themselves with their ages and sometimes not. I'm interested that we do have some folks who are even happy to talk about end of life issues. I think that can sometimes be like a bridge too far for folks. But we have had programming on doing advanced directives and putting together an estate plan. And those have actually seemed really popular with people. That's something that is certainly on people's minds. Maybe what we're doing is giving people a place to discuss these things. But I will say that I think something that happens a lot is that the as bad as the aging community is about addressing LGBT issues, sometimes the LGBT community is as bad at addressing aging issues. There's kind of like, I mean, not like, there's a lot of focus on youth in the LGBT movement, which makes total sense when you think about who is vulnerable and living under a roof with someone who may not accept them, who is dependent on a parent or another caregiver or family member to take care of them and just to meet their basic needs. But in a lot of ways, some of our elders are as vulnerable, certainly economically or physically. And a lot of LGBT spaces just don't seem accepting or accessible to folks who are aging. So the short answer is, I think within the community that we're working with and kind of cultivating, nope, people are here, they're happy, they consider aging to be a marker of pride, which I think is awesome. And I would love to see more of that in the wider LGBT space.
I would agree with that. I certainly agree with everything you said, and you hit it spot on. There is, I think, a lot of ageism within the LGBTQ plus community. We're very youth focused and youth centered. There is, I would say in some instances, a lack of attention to the normal natural process of aging. And that always strikes me when I go to a local gay bar with my husband, and not one man in the room has one gray hair. Of any age. They could be 80, but just black hair. I mean, you know, so it always does strike me how youth oriented our entire culture is. And Lucy, I'm sure you have comments to make to that too.
Well, I think what you're saying is true. I mean, our society is very youth oriented in general. And for young people, regardless of what community or how they identify themselves, it's very, very difficult today. I'm so glad that I am my age and I don't have to go through that. The whole idea of feeling good about who you are and accepting your physical look or the way you come across is so, so important. So all of this is really very, very interesting and educational. And I kind of was thinking, Kate, because one of the things that sort of keeps popping up when we do our sessions is the whole idea of people coming in with their own, I'm talking about healthcare workers, with their own values, their own cultures, and we just did something like that. And it was just interesting since just to look at this. And I do believe that education is the key factor to a lot of what we're talking about today. Sensitization, it doesn't mean that people don't know, but sometimes people don't know. And when we talk about even language, how do you approach someone? How do you talk to someone? How do you introduce someone? So these are key issues. So I do have a question for you, unless there's other questions that I don't see. Okay. So what do you think? What do you think aging healthcare providers nationally across the United States and Canada can do to be more inclusive and sensitive? Because that issue comes up a lot, especially when we talk about long-term care, regardless of who's working in it. I think most people are kind and would like to do the right thing. So I'm just asking you that question in a general topic.
Yeah, sure. I, of course, have many thoughts about this. I think it's like the first kind of baby step, right, is for these institutions to make a commitment to being inclusive or being affirming. And then to put some teeth on that commitment, right? Like have the policy, the anti-discrimination policy, or enlarge the policy to cover sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. Relying on the Bostock ruling from the Supreme Court, we are now like required to do that as a part of understanding federal law, right? Discrimination on the basis of sex now covers sexual identities, and I think arguably sexual orientation. To have policies, right, around staffing and around residents in facilities, like these are the expectations that we have of each other. This is how we are expected to treat each other, and put some teeth to that too. I think it is really, you talked on that education piece, it is really important to educate staff. One place that we kind of see the issue, I guess, falling through the cracks or not getting addressed is also with volunteers, right? So some of our smaller aging services are reliant on volunteers, especially to do stuff like staff the front desk or answer the phones, right? So if that volunteer is not someone who you've reached with a basic level of education, we have an ADRN partner here where things like went really far south. And as far as we can tell, what happened is someone called, they got a volunteer who hadn't been through any kind of sensitivity training. They got into an argument with this volunteer, and that person like wrote off the entire aging and disability resource network, like never going to interact with these people again, which the one like I can totally see and that's justified. But we also need to make sure like the people who are the front line or the first person that you encounter, whether that's a volunteer person, whether it's a staffer that started 12 hours ago, that person needs to have some kind of sensitivity training immediately and right off the bat. I'm also really passionate about getting good data. It's amazing how much work is done. Frankly, it's amazing how much work actually manages to get done in the LGBT sphere with us not asking broadly questions about sexual orientation or gender identity and just being like, we kind of heard, or there's some national statistics and I'm going to cook them up for my grant based on some local data that I found that's 10 years old. But all of our like intakes need to be addressing sexual orientation and gender identity at a base level, so you know what the pronouns or the right name is to call somebody and who the important people are in their lives. And that's something too that I think when we talk about doing education, there's a certain point at which we have to start by saying, we are not here to change hearts or minds. You can believe what you believe outside of this facility or outside of your profession. But when you are here in this space, you are committed to serving the person who is in front of you the way that they need to be served, the way that they desire to be served. And it's often easier to get people to agree to that and say, yes, I do want to provide the best service possible to the broadest number of people possible. And then you say, well, that means learning a little bit about LGBT elders. And they're kind of more likely to agree to that. The other thing that I would just love to see more institutions do, not only for my own networking, but is to identify somebody on staff or a volunteer if your organization is running on volunteer labor. Who can make this kind of their baby, who will be the advocate or the liaison for LGBT issues within your organization. That means that when I go to your website and I type in LGBT in the search bar, I find a person rather than just a page that's kind of generalizations about, oh, we love and accept everybody. If there's someone's name attached to that who's being responsible for it, I think it pushes the issue further internally. And it means that I have someone in that organization who seems safe, who I can go to with questions, or I can go to and say, hey, this thing happened with the front staff person and it made me really uncomfortable. Can you think about, or how are you going to address this going forward? So making it kind of somebody's baby, whether it's a personal or professional interest. I really hope that people don't just like find the most out person on their staff and decide that, oh, this is your project now. But someone who is willing to kind of take that on as their personal issue, I think does a lot to move things forward.
That idea.
I think that you're
I love it.
requiring people to maybe step up in their own organization, because I did see something on the chat. So thank you for that.
Well, GJ had mentioned earlier that labor and immigration are LGBTQ plus aging issues, and they really are for all the reasons that you said. Something else that touched me that you touched upon is people compiling data from publicly available data and coming up with a narrative. And at the beginning of the pandemic, when we started our Pride series, we were talking about the fact that a number of LGBTQ plus serving organizations, including LGMA, the Lesbian and Gay Medical Association, they had come together to sign a letter stating that LGBTQ plus persons were at greater risk for severe complications and death from COVID. And that was based upon an analysis of publicly available data that was looking at risk factors like chronic illness, such as diabetes, or the behavior of smoking cigarettes, for example. And we know that there is a higher rate of tobacco use in our community. But what was done or not done with that letter that was signed by over 100 organizations was a source of personal upset to me, because to me, it furthered certain stigma. It didn't allow providers to do anything tangible with that information that was put together when vaccine populations were being prioritized and chronic illnesses were included. No one came back and said, hey, remember this letter that 100 people signed? LGBT persons should also be part of that prioritized population group. That didn't happen. When we got vaccinated, no one collected data on our gender identity or sexual orientation. So we don't know what vaccine uptake has been like in our community versus in others. So we do need better data, and we need people to be better at asking the right questions about the data that's being provided. That's something that we always try to do in our program, is to teach people how to think more critically. And so I thank you for all the points that you brought across today, because you certainly caused me to think a little bit more critically about some of the issues that we do address as ongoing part of our program. Does anyone else? I can't believe how quickly our hour has flown by, but I see that we have only a few minutes left. So I wanted to ask if anyone had any last questions or comments, anything that they wanted to share.
And for those of you who have shared on chat, thank you so much. It really has been, it's been wonderful.
GJ had written in the chat, imagine trying to be a social scientist working in this field and find decent employment. And I echo that. One of the first job interviews I had after getting my doctorate in public health was to do research on aging in the LGBT community. And the starting salary for the position, it wasn't a postdoc, was $32,000 a year to live in Miami. And I thought, this is the most amazing research, but who can live on that? So I now do different things, but equally as important.
And, you know, Elliot, I just want to say this to you, you know, the comments that you make about looking at the statistics, you know, because you're in public health way up at the top, where you're looking at everything and kind of winnowing down what's really the important things, I think is incredibly critical. And just like Kate said, you know, sometimes you have to use your local statistics to get what you want, but there's always, you know what the deal is with statistics. It's, I don't know, liars, goddamn liars and statisticians or something. You can always figure something out. So I really thank you for that. I just want to say that we are at the end of our hour. There's a couple of comments, little housekeeping things that I need to say, and maybe we'll have time for one more question at the end, I hope, because I'll do this quickly. In the several days, you'll receive a post-session questionnaire. All of Kate's information, resources, as well as Elliot's wonderful compendium of resources will be available to those who are registered for the session. And if you're not registered, if you got the information from a friend and just called in or just got online, then, you know, please register, because then you'll get all of the information about the teleconnection sessions and you'll get all of the resource material. And you register by calling the WellMed Charitable Foundation Customer Service Representative, and that number is 866-390-6491. And many of you probably know Minerva, who's our fabulous customer service person. She helps me out constantly. She's my backup and go-to. We also encourage you to fill out that questionnaire because it helps us improve our programs over time. I want to thank our expert speakers. Oh my gosh, Elliot, Lucy bring so much to the program, and Kate, it was really special to have you here today. I want to thank you for that. Now, many new sessions have been scheduled There are 2 pages worth, and as I said, there are 11 more this month. I am not going to go through them except for Lucy and Elliot's because we're on their program series right now. Next week on the 9th, we have the Pride of Aging. And we're going to have someone for GJ and Dr. Dr. Mann Hansen with the Coalition for Aging. That's going to be really interesting. Oh, GJ, I wish I was going to be on that one. The Pride of Community on June 16th and the Pride of Keeping Active. And Elliot's really good at that because that's how he de-stresses before these sessions every morning. So, and we know that from what he's told us. So please join us for those. Also, I want to let you all know that I want to give thanks to the WellMed Charitable Foundation for sponsoring this series and all of the series that they've done, and to ask you all, if you haven't done it before, to go onto their site where they have all their podcasts, and we'll be able to see Kate's podcast too, because we'll send that resource. And our podcasts are at www.caregiverteleconnection.org. And there's many in there, and they've been there for several years now. We've been collecting them, and many of them are with Lucy and Elliot and some of our guest speakers. And we would just really love for you to find the information that you need on those podcasts. So let's see, we have 1 minute. One last question, one last comment, folks.
I just really want to thank you, Kate, so much for your time and what you do for the community, for your service to the community, and all of the information and the perspectives that you shared. And I also want to thank GJ for participating today. GJ will be with us next week with the Coalition for Aging LGBTQ+. So we are very excited for our lineup this month and to have a spotlight on so many great organizations and people.
And I'll be looking at that podcast because I won't be there next week. No, I want to see you, GJ. Anyway, thank you all so much. I hope you all have a great and safe day. Keep that mask on when you need it. Be smart. And we hope you will join us again very soon. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody now and stop the recording.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Kate. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.